Strong Enough merch is now available. Go to strongenoughpod.com and check out all the stuff that you can get so that you'll have those daily reminders that you are strong enough and you are worth it. Welcome to the Strong Enough podcast, where we talk about the challenges and celebrate the triumphs of people just like you. I'm your host, Claudia. Today's guest is going to share how a 1993 sexual assault and the events that happened afterwards when she went to the police led her to create an organization called Doe No More. Please help me welcome Donna Palomba. Donna, how are you doing today?
I'm well, Claudia. How are you?
I am well also, and I have to tell you that your smile is brightening my day already because it's a little early here for me. So I just want to say thank you for being here and for shining bright on this early morning.
Well, thank you, Claudia. It's really my pleasure. I really appreciate you having me on your show.
Absolutely. So we have a lot to talk about, and I do want to jump in, but I would love it first if you would tell the audience just a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Donna Palomba. I live in Connecticut, and I am a happily married mom of 2 adult children and now a nanny to 2 wonderful baby girls. One is 3.5, one is 1.5, and life is busy and fun.
Life does sound busy and fun. I got a little tired just hearing all that. So how amazing is it to be a Nana now, or a nanny?
Nanny.
How amazing is that for you?
It is wonderful, and it really makes me even more passionate about creating a safer and healthier world for children like my grandchildren.
So let's talk about that, and we're just gonna get right into it. So I became familiar with your story from actually a Dateline episode that aired this year, which was actually your second Dateline episode, as I understand. And we're going to talk about what you went through. So you were the victim, now survivor, of a very brutal sexual assault in your own home. And that wasn't the worst victimization that you went through, though, in that entire situation. I would appreciate it if you would talk a little bit about what you were feeling when you called 911 and what you were expecting to happen.
Sure. So I have to say, Claudia, as you mentioned, it was a horrific attack. It was in my home. My husband was away for the very first time, and my 2 children, who were ages 5 and 7, were sleeping down the hall. I was tied, bound, and raped. I had a pillowcase over my head. The perpetrator had put a gun to my head, threatened to kill me multiple times, and I really didn't think I was going to survive. So I was in a state of shock after, thankfully, he left. I was concerned about the kids, checked on them. They were fine. This was in 1993, and I picked up the phone to call for help, and the phone line was dead. And in 93, I didn't have a cell phone. Not many people did. I mean, today we were just attached to it, but back then it was very uncommon to have a cell phone. So I realized I couldn't communicate with the outside world. He had cut the phone lines. So I had to run to a neighbor, and I was in a bathrobe. I had still the ties that he bound me with on my neck and wrist, in a state of shock, as I said. And so I was scared to call the police, but thankfully the neighbor who I ran to immediately picked up the phone and dialed 911. And then I spoke to the officers, and my main concern was my children. I had to leave them alone. Of course, I knew the perpetrator had left, and I locked the home, but still, it was so unnerving. And I actually have the 911 call, and you can hear me hyperventilating. I was in a situation that was so foreign to me. I just didn't know what to do, but my main concern was the children. And so I spoke to the officers, and I expected that they would come to the home, do whatever they normally would do on a type of crime like this. I was left at the neighbor's home by myself. The neighbor that I ran to was there by himself, and he ran to the house to protect the children, which I had said, please, they're up there by themselves. So he went and stood guard until police arrived. I was told by the officer on the phone, someone would be back to pick me up. And so I complied and I waited. No one picked me up. So here I am in a home that I'm not familiar with, knowing that police are on their way. I took the time from there at the working phone to call family members. They said they would be right to my house. So I knew that people were arriving, and I was so afraid for the children that they'd be so frightened. So I actually made a decision to run back up the street to my home alone. And I just grabbed a knife in the kitchen drawer from the neighbors. And at that point, officers were arriving on the scene. And again, I was really in a state of shock. One officer said, please give me the knife that I had in my hand. And I just said, how are the children? And can I go see them? And they allowed me to. I just remember seeing people walking all around, up and down the stairs. I remember officers, I told them the perpetrator attacked me, and they wondered how he got in. I said, I have no idea. I remember seeing them opening and closing windows. And of course, now I realize that they should not have been doing that. The entire perimeter of the home should have been cordoned off, and forensic should have been called in, and photographs, fingerprints taken. But you know what? That was the last thing that was on my mind. I was just worried about the kids, not believe, still trying to process what had just happened. And my eye started to throb, my right eye, and it was tearing really badly. And the one female officer that was there that night suggested I go to the hospital. And after making arrangements that family members would carry the children to my mother-in-law's, which was right down the street, I went to the hospital. And a sex crimes kit was conducted. And I was treated for a scratched cornea. My right eye was scratched, and so it was treated and patched. I had lacerations on my wrists. I had to take a pill because they had asked me, where I was in my cycle, and I was so sick the next day. But, I was just complying. I was doing everything that I was told to do. And just, again, being so grateful the children were untouched and that I had survived. And so honestly, Claudia, the feeling that I had after he left, and when I saw that my children were there untouched, was gratitude. And from that moment, I thought, okay, if I survive this and the children were untouched, we're going to be okay. And I had to break the news to my husband the next day when he flew back from Colorado to Connecticut. And that was very difficult. His brothers were there, a detective was there in the kitchen. I could still picture it in my mind, and he was livid. I mean, he could not believe the one time he was away that someone would come and do harm to his family. So, I mean, that's how, but we were pulling together, and I was well on my way to healing.
It is amazing how much you went through, and at the same time, what a clear head that you had, and how you were able to take the steps necessary, not only to get yourself help, but to also get help for your children. Now, one of the things that I notice a lot, I watch a lot of true crime, and I despise when you hear police officers or detectives say that person didn't act right. They didn't cry enough, or they didn't say the right things. And it's usually when they're referring to a suspect. And it kind of makes me laugh, and it makes me angry, because it's like, what is the right way to act? Who is giving us this definition when we're in a certain situation of what we're supposed to do? I know that you encountered that as well. And one of the first things that that kind of made people think that was the 911 call, which you can clearly hear the terror in your voice, but you called the rapist a gentleman. What did it feel like to you to have that moment taken so out of context and turned against you?
It was truly unbelievable to me. And this wasn't even coming into play in my mind until after. So if you can imagine, all this happens. I thought I did everything right. I talked to the officers on the 911 call. I went back to the house. I complied completely. They told me not to wash. I still had the binds on me. I went to the hospital. I had the sex crimes kit conducted. I gave a complete statement. And when my husband was back, we both went down and gave all this information. We knew there was a masked, armed perpetrator who had broken in to our home. We didn't even know how he got in at that point. And so we wanted this to be taken with the utmost, interest and really keeping us all safe. So I was clearly focused on my family. I wanted to keep things as normal as possible for the children. At that time, I was a partner in a marketing agency that was growing, and I loved my job. So I was back to work in a couple of days, really focused on the future and keeping things as normal as possible. Of course, that is always, after that happened, it was always in my mind. We always took extra precautions with alarm systems, and I was very aware of the perimeters around me and all of that. But we were moving forward. It wasn't until a couple weeks afterward that I realized something was wrong when I wanted to give an officer that was in charge of my case, a lieutenant actually, more information that I thought might be helpful. And I asked him if he would come to my agency where we had the marketing agency, as he had done before. And he said no. And I said, why? I said, the perpetrator threatened me that if I called the police, he would kill me. I really don't feel comfortable going to the police department. And he said, if you have information, you need to come here at the department. And I thought the information was important enough that I should go. And so, as you can imagine, when I went there, I wasn't feeling comfortable to begin with. So this was 1 month after the crime. I made the appointment. I went to the police station, and I was greeted by this lieutenant who was very cold. His demeanor was very strange. And I thought, what is up with this guy? But I went with him. He put me in a small interrogation room. On a little desk was a tape recorder. And back in '93, it was like the reel-to-reel cassette. So he hit play and record, and then he proceeded to take out a little white piece of paper and read me my Miranda rights. At that point, I didn't know what he was doing. I was like, excuse me, what are you doing? And he said, this is how I'm going to handle it. And I said, handle what? And he said, why don't you tell me what really happened that night? And I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? I told you what happened. I told you everything. You said, we have rock solid evidence that you purposefully lied to the police. Of course, you can imagine, I was just stunned. And I said, what do you, I've done nothing but tell the truth. Something is terribly wrong. I can explain anything. And then he pursued and he said, I have rock solid evidence, and you have everything to lose. I'll never forget. He held up his hand and he said, your children, your husband, your career, your reputation. If you don't tell me right now what happened. I said, you're scaring me, please. And then he went on to say that he had countless interviews and photographs that proved that I was lying. I said, please show them to me. Show me the photos, show me the interviews. I've done nothing but tell the truth. There's something really, really wrong here. All to no avail. And I began to cry. The room started spinning. And I often talk about the fact that had I known then what I know now, I would not have sat there and been re-traumatized, re-victimized in such a horrific way. That was so damaging. But I didn't know any better. And I did nothing but tell the truth. So I thought, I'm going to straighten this out. I have to make this man understand that he's going on a wrong path, completely wrong. And there was, it just progressed, and he just kept escalating the fact that he knows that I was lying, that, he thinks things snowballed and things got out of hand. And I'm like, what things? I don't understand. And finally, as I was sitting there, I just trying to process everything, I looked at him and I said, what could you be thinking of doing this to me? And he looked at his watch and he said, I'm thinking of what I'm going to have for lunch. And it was like a gut punch. And I'm like, well, I don't know what else to do here. So I just sat there. I didn't want to leave because he had threatened me with arrest. I didn't want him to arrest me, but there was no reasoning with him. So finally he said to me, I'll tell you what, I will let you leave under the condition that you come back this afternoon. You tell me what really happened. And this tape goes in the drawer. I close the case and that's it. But if you don't come back, I will find you, I will arrest you, and your photo will be in tomorrow's paper. He said, I have 27 cases on this desk. One way or another, your case is being closed today. So I left there, honestly, feeling worse than I had the night of the crime. I was in shock then. I was just so confused. It was surreal. I was like, how can I be in this moment, in this time? What is happening to me? And I made it to my parents' house, but I remember it was in October and it was a cool day and I had a trench coat on. I was numb. I could not even take off my jacket. I was just walking around, just telling my parents what had happened. My father was fuming. He flew out of the house, went to find my husband, who was actually across from the police station, dropping our little son off to kindergarten, afternoon kindergarten. And my father found him and they both went over to the police department, demanded to see this lieutenant and asked him in the middle of a busy hallway. They weren't even, granted to go into a private room. And they said, what are you doing to Donna? What is going on? And the lieutenant looked at my father and my husband and said, her story is full of holes. And yes, there is a threat of her arrest. We were dumbfounded as a family. I was raised to, like most people, that the police are there to protect and serve, that they are there in your time of need. I had never needed law enforcement before. And so I just didn't understand. I couldn't comprehend or process, knowing that, I was the victim of this horrific crime in my home when I was sleeping. You think it's a safe harbor. Your doors are locked. You're sleeping in your bed. And then I was attacked at the police department, which is supposed to be another safe haven where you go for help. And I was wounded and harmed in the most re-victimizing, traumatizing way. And so honestly, that's when my healing came to an abrupt halt. I couldn't eat or sleep. Nothing made sense to me anymore. It was really an awful time.
I know that after that happened, I believe you and your husband ended up going to a supervisor of this lieutenant to try to get some answers and try to find out what in the world was going on. But later you found out that that was actually his brother. So how did it feel again that you're still in this place where people are supposed to protect you and you are continuing to meet these ridiculous obstacles in the form of people that are questioning you?
Right. It was very, very troubling. After, my husband and father were told that, we're like, what do we do now? And so we thought we have to report this. But the one thing that I was counting on was this tape recording. I mean, the lieutenant had I saw the tape in the recorder spinning, and he actually had to flip it because at that time it was 30 minutes per side kind of thing. So unfortunately, I was in that interrogation for about an hour. So he had to flip it. So both sides, I knew had the recording. So I thought anyone could hear what this guy did to me. And so the when we decided to, take further action and talk to his superior, it was the captain. And mind you, the captain was in charge of sexual crimes, and this lieutenant worked for him. And yes, they were brothers. And so we met with the captain. His name was Robert Moran. The lieutenant was Douglas Moran. And this was the Waterbury Police Department in Connecticut. And when we met with the captain, first thing I said was, have you listened to the tape? And he said, no. I said, you didn't? He said, no, I'm filled in on it. I said, well, can we listen to it together? And he said, no, it's an ongoing investigation. And I said, but that is why we're here, to tell you what your lieutenant did. And he refused. And so I said, well, you're going to have to hear what he did to me. And so I relayed as best I could what he had done during that interrogation. And I knew right away something was wrong with him, because when I'm telling you this, or when I'm telling most people what this lieutenant did, they're kind of like, oh my goodness, shock and disbelief. And this captain was just sat there like I was telling him a nice story, and nonchalant and just not shocked at all. And so John and I were both like, what's happening here? We explained what happened, and he said, well, there's certain things that happen in an investigation. I'm like, what do you mean certain things? He threatened me with arrest, and it was going nowhere pretty fast. And he said, there's certain things, and there's certain interrogation methods, and there's people who come to us with reports, and there's people who are not truthful. And I said, I did nothing but tell the truth. And there is an armed mass perpetrator out there that needs to be found. And so he said to me and my husband, we are wondering if the children might provide information, our 5 and 7-year-old. And I said, they were sleeping. And he said, how do you know they were sleeping? I said, because I was there. I checked on them. As soon as the perpetrator left, I ran, and they were sleeping. And he's like, well, they may still be able to. And both my husband and I said, no, you're not talking to our children. And I thought that was so odd, but it later tied in to the whole thing and the reason why this lieutenant initially did this to me. And that is because someone in our community told this lieutenant, went to the police station, told this lieutenant that he had heard a rumor that in my case, that I had potentially made something up, that maybe I was having an affair, and that he had heard that one of the children woke up and saw something, and then Donna covered up the affair by claiming that she was raped. And this person that gave the lieutenant this information said, I have no idea if this is true or not, but I just thought I'd pass it along. That is what this lieutenant took from this man, this information, and did not find out if it had any validity whatsoever. It was a complete lie. And anyone that knew me knew I was faithful to my husband, who to this day we're in a committed marriage, and that my day was spent at work with the children at the church. He could have talked to anyone who knew me, colleagues, friends, family members, and gotten more information. But instead, he took this as gospel, this gossip as gospel, and came at me and threatened me with arrest.
Was there ever a point when you were going through this that you regretted making that 911 call and going to the police?
I can't say I regretted it, but I was dumbfounded until I was able to pull myself up, and with my faith and my family, just really try and take one step at a time to heal and to feel better. I never regretted it because of the DNA evidence. And I knew that, we had no idea who this was. I was at a terrible disadvantage. I was sleeping on my stomach when he jumped me. And so, I had so little to go on, but we had DNA. And that would prove, really important in the future. But as I was really understanding more about these types of crimes, I learned all the stigmas that are associated with them and why most victims don't report. And, I can understand that certainly, but I don't regret doing it. That's why one of the reasons why I am so committed to making things better for the future. No one should have to hold that in and not tell someone about this type of trauma, the trauma of sexual crimes.
One of the things that you mentioned was about the crime scene originally. And as soon as you start, talking about your home, and I'm thinking the same thing, like, okay, we rope off the entire house and we bring in CSIs and we collect evidence. But it sounds like in your case, one rookie officer collected the bed sheets and your clothing, and that's pretty much it. Do you think this was a lack of training, or what precipitated them, honestly, from the get-go, not handling your case correctly?
Supposedly they were trained in sexual crimes, and actually the female officer was the one that did the training, and yet she was not helpful either. She tried to play both sides, and yes, they did collect the bed sheets. I went to the hospital where they took the clothing, but looking back, they should have known better. I think it was in the wee hours of a Saturday morning. I don't know, if they were more rookie officers that were available there, but they were all trained better. And the bottom line is that, unfortunately, with regard to sexual crimes, there is a stigma about it that, I don't know if it's because no one wants to believe these things happen. And because if it could happen to a person, it could happen to them or their family members, but they are so misunderstood. And unfortunately, a lot of officers are, and yourself, because you were an officer, when you're with a suspect, you need to find out the facts. And so you need a different set of skills when you're dealing with a victim, especially right after an attack when they are traumatized. And unfortunately, a lot of officers don't realize that, or don't understand the harm that they may do when they approach a victim in a manner that is puts them feeling like they're not being truthful, or that they have something to hide, or that and just your body language, your eye contact, the tone of your voice, everything that you do is going to have an impact on how that victim reacts. And unfortunately, in my case, it was in many ways more damaging than the rape itself.
How disappointing was that to you, that you essentially got victimized twice over at least, and that it was worse, going through reporting it and being questioned?
Yeah, it was shocking to me. The whole thing was shocking. The whole thing, from the fact that this kind of crime could happen to me, to then reporting, and then the ordeal afterward with the lieutenant. I just never dreamed that I would be in this situation. My background is in marketing. I'm a designer. And so I never dreamed that I would be involved in these types of things, but I had no choice. And so I had to learn quickly about what to do. And I knew that there was a perpetrator out there that was not being sought after, and I learned that, these types of crimes, these types of perpetrators repeat. And so I knew I had to do more. So I just, my moral compass is like, okay, what's the next step? What can we do? So obviously, since the captain was useless, we decided to have an internal affairs investigation be conducted, because I then learned about these crimes, that most victims are under the age of 24, that most, over 70%, will not even report. And I just believe these crimes are the most misunderstood and therefore underreported crimes in the world. And so I thought, this has to change, and it could start with me. And so we demanded the internal affairs investigation be conducted. It took a year. We went through all these depositions. And when you talk about internal affairs, it's colleagues looking into colleagues in the same police department. So right there, there's a tremendous conflict. But we thought, well, we have the truth on our side. And so we went through all of this. And I had to, at that point, get legal help. So this was done with the help of my lawyer, our lawyer, I should say. So my husband and I went through all of this. And after a year, we got back a simple one-page report, actually complimenting the officers, the initial officers, and the lieutenant on a thorough investigation. The only thing, and that the interrogation that the Lieutenant Douglas Moran did with me was in no way improper given the circumstances. This is what the report said. The only thing that this lieutenant was remanded for was the fact that the tape, apparently, he said, was set to the wrong switch, and he could not produce a working copy of the tape. And mind you, he was in charge of technology for the police department. So, I mean, right there, I was just, you got to be kidding me, after a year. So we had to go further, and I just wouldn't stop. And so we sued the law enforcement officers. I just could not imagine another victim who was younger, who didn't have the faith or the family support. How could they possibly get through this? And so I had to do what I could. I had to at least try. And we filed suit, a civil suit. It took 7 years to go to trial. And during that time, I met with the brightest and the best people I knew to help to understand more about these crimes and to find a way forward. And so Dr. Henry Lee, who is an internationally renowned forensic scientist, resampled the DNA in my case, because at that point I didn't trust anything with the Waterbury Police Department. And so we knew we had good DNA evidence. And I actually worked with Connecticut Sexual Assault Crisis Services and others who were experienced with sexual assault crimes, and created a list of things that need to change and need to be implemented. And at the very top of the list is that every victim should be treated with dignity and respect. And, that internal affairs investigations should be conducted outside of the department. And that, this superior was his brother, and that's a conflict. Like, there was a series of things that were problematic, and there was also other things that are just things that should be done as a matter of course. And so I wasn't suing for the money, I was suing for change. And unfortunately, I was getting lip service about, I would have settled if I knew that those things that we had come up with would be implemented, but I didn't believe it for a minute. So after 7 years, in the fall of 2000, we were told that trial would begin in January 2021. I mean, 2001. And unfortunately, I was diagnosed with breast cancer a couple weeks before trial. And at that point, I was like a steamroller who could not be stopped. We had prepared so thoroughly for the investigation, everything was, the depositions were in order, the witnesses we had were ready. And I made the careful decision with my doctors that we would proceed with the trial. I think it was the right decision for my mental health and physical health, and that right after the trial was over, I would, have a lumpectomy and radiation therapy for the breast cancer, which is what happened. The trial lasted a month, and it was absolutely brutal. Every day, my husband and I, my parents and friends would walk into that courtroom, and we would watch as officer after officer swore to tell the truth, and then got up and just spewed out the most hideous lies. Like, for example, you mentioned earlier the 911 call. She called the perpetrator a gentleman. Who would do that? when you're in a state of shock, you cannot determine. I wasn't choosing my words. I was just spewing because I wanted to get information out. And probably one of the most devastating things is I learned from Lieutenant Moran that he was given a report by one of the officers on the scene that night who was taking notes. They made comments about my home, that my home appeared very neat, which I have no idea what that has to do with anything. And that I was wearing, it looked like I was wearing the nylons around my neck, which the perpetrator had bound me with, and around my wrist, which he had tied my wrist together behind my back, as if they were a stage prop. I was just in shock hearing that, and my heart sank because I listened to what the officer said on the 911 call. He said, "Do not wash, do not remove anything." This is that same Department of Police that are now saying that, I looked like I was wearing them like a stage prop. It was so hurtful. I had the weight of the cancer on my mind, and the trial was just so every day. I didn't know how I was going to get up and keep going, but I did. And the weight was just dripping off of me. Finally, though, Dr. Henry Lee took the stand, and he spoke about what we talked about earlier, the proper handling of the crime scene, how the entire perimeter should have been cordoned off, how forensics should have been called in, how fingerprints and photographs should have been taken. And then Dr. David Johnson, who heads up the post-traumatic stress center at Yale here in Connecticut, who I sought treatment from, took the stand. And he said that I was a strong person who was well on my way to healing when this lieutenant, when he did that to me in that interrogation room and read me my rights, it really hindered my healing. And when I was my most vulnerable, and in many ways was more damaging than the rape itself, and likely the reason why I have long-term PTSD and will have it for the rest of my life. And then Neil O'Leary took the stand. Neil was going up in the ranks. He was an officer in the Waterbury Police Department, and he was, I believe, headed toward chief at the time. I'm not exactly sure what his rank was at that time, but he took over the investigation a few years earlier, and he made it clear that he believed me and he was going to do everything he can. He came in months and months later, so he wasn't, he was very clear on the fact that, we've lost a lot of ground here, but I'm going to canvass the neighborhood. I'm going to talk to everyone who knows you. I'm going to look into everything that I can. And he had the courage to take that stand. And he said that there was not one shred of evidence to prove that I had done anything but tell the truth. And the officers after that were found negligent by a jury. So, that was quite the ordeal.
So we're 7 years later, and that is a win in, one aspect, but we still have a perpetrator who is out there. How did that feel to you to know that this person could be walking down the street right beside you and you wouldn't even know it?
Oh, it was unnerving. I mean, you live your life totally differently. I was always looking over my shoulder, aware of, just things that seemed out of the ordinary, looking out for different, people that might seem strange. It stays with you, certainly, with something like this. And I have to say that Neil O'Leary went on to become chief of police, and there was an amazing turnaround of events. In 2004, a man in our community who was an upstanding citizen attacked a coworker who was 21 years old at the time, and she was able to escape, but he tried to rape her. And Neil O'Leary called my husband and I and asked if we knew who this man was. His name is John Regan. And my husband said, yes, he's a friend. I grew up with him since kindergarten. Why? And then Neil said he's going to be arrested for unlawful restraint of his coworker because he tried to attack her and she was able to break free. And John said, well, I'm sure he has nothing to do with, are you thinking he has something to do with our case? And I'm sure he doesn't, but do whatever you have to do. And I said, yes, please, whatever you can do to see if there's any connection. So at the time of his arrest for attacking the 21-year-old, Neil asked him for a voluntary DNA sample, and there was no DNA from that incident. And so John Regan agreed, and the buccal swab of saliva was taken from his mouth, and we would find out 2 months later that it was a perfect match to the DNA in my case 11 years earlier. This was a man leading a double life. He was thought to be a happily married, church-going father of 3. I mentioned he grew up in the same neighborhood with my husband. Since they were, kids, 5 years old, they played football together in high school, and he was well thought of, well liked. This was a shock. It sent shockwaves in the community. But DNA evidence is irrefutable. And it was unbelievable to finally know who had committed this crime. But it was so bittersweet because of the betrayal that my husband felt.
So it was 11 years later. And unfortunately, at that time, the statute of limitations had run out for the sexual assault charge. Is that correct?
That is correct. And we were devastated to learn he couldn't be charged for the crime he committed. We were told that the statute was 5 years and it had run out 6 years earlier. And so the only thing they could get him on was kidnapping, which was going to be difficult to prove, but that didn't have a statute of limitations. So they did arrest him for kidnapping. Because he came from a very powerful and wealthy family in the community, he was afforded the best attorneys that money could buy. And they had him out on bond. So he was out on $350,000 bond for a year while we waited. We didn't know if he was going to come back and kill me as he had threatened to, or I was so worried that my husband would run into him or find him. And, just the thought of that was completely frightening. But we never went to trial for that case because he crossed state lines. We live in Connecticut. He crossed state lines in October of 2005. So he was arrested in October 2004 for kidnapping in my case. A year later, we were still awaiting trial. He was out and he crossed state lines. It was actually on a Halloween night. And he went to Saratoga Springs High School, where he waited for as the next victim. And he waited until Lindsay Ferguson, a 17-year-old track star, was returning from track practice to her car. He had his van parked right next to her. And as she was trying to, squeeze between the two cars, his van door opened and he grabbed her around the torso and the mouth and tried to pull her into his van. Thankfully, Lindsay is very strong. She kicked, she screamed, and she broke free. And he just said, shut up, don't tell anyone. And thankfully, coaches that were in the area heard her cries and ran to her. John Regan got back in that van and started driving. He was able to get out of the high school parking lot, started driving on the streets of Saratoga. Fortunately, one of the coaches jumped in his car and caught up with him. And by that time, of course, police were called and Lindsay was in the police car. They did a drive-by. She said, yes, that's him. They took him into custody. They took the van into evidence. The back seat had been pulled out. There was a tarp, a noose, a sedative, a syringe, $2,500 in cash, many pictures of the 21-year-old coworker he had attacked, a picture of me and other women he had been stalking in Connecticut and New York, unbeknownst to them. That's what it finally took to get John Regan behind bars.
Because he was unable to be charged with rape, that was unacceptable to you, and you were determined to make a change. I would love it if you would share what you have done so that future victims and survivors don't experience the same thing that you did.
Sure, absolutely. So, I was devastated when I learned that he could not be arrested for the crime he committed. It didn't make sense. And then when you look into it and realize, that these laws that were written, these statutes that were in place, weren't keeping up with the science and the technology that was available. So the DNA technology hadn't advanced to a point where it is. And of course, it's even more advanced now. So in 2007, I advocated for a change in the law in Connecticut. And I worked with different people in Hartford at the Capitol there, talked to legislators, and explained just that our laws need to keep up with the science that's available today. This is irrefutable evidence. This perpetrator went on to attack again. He should have been arrested for the crime he committed, which would have simplified things. He would have been locked up and put in jail for a very long time. And so I'm very happy to say that Governor M. Jody Rell, who was the governor of Connecticut at the time, put forth a governor's bill in 2007 that my case was the impetus for. And so she actually signed it into law in a ceremonial signing with me by her side at a press event at the Waterbury Police Department. And it was just like a full circle moment, because that's the department where I had been attacked earlier and read my Miranda rights. And here, we're making progress, and Governor Rell signed this into law. So there is no longer a statute of limitations with DNA for sexual crimes in the state of Connecticut. However, now we're trying to eliminate the statute altogether, because as we learn more about these types of crimes, we learn that most victims don't report. And if they do, it's years, sometimes years later, and we need to give them a path to justice. There was an interesting fact that I didn't know until more recently, and that's especially with victims of child sexual abuse. When this abuse begins, when you're, it's horrific to think about, but 3, 4, 5 years old, and often it happens over a period of years. You don't know how to process this. You're a child, and oftentimes you don't disclose for decades. You don't even remember or can start remembering the things, and they come to you years and years later, and with help you can understand more about what happened. But the average age of those types of survivors is 52. The average age of disclosure is 52 years old, and at that point, most laws, the statutes have been passed, and there's no path to justice. And unfortunately, there should be. There really should be. And we all have to understand that. And of course, it doesn't eliminate the burden of proof. That still has to. I mean, you can't just say, okay, well, he did this and it's 50 years later. But let that victim who has become a survivor help her or him to have a path to justice. Because if we would just look at this reasonably and logically, these perpetrators don't stop. They continue this behavior. And so we could prevent future crimes from happening. There's a role that all of us could play in this. And it's a difficult topic, but that is why I started Doe No More the same year that I advocated for the removal of the statute of limitations with DNA. And our mission is to improve the way society responds to victims of sexual assault, to empower survivors to find their voice. And by doing so, like in my case, it's advanced my own healing. And then I can go on to educate others and help others to understand knowledge is power. And without this knowledge, people are going to continue to fall into these traps. These perpetrators are manipulative. We can all aid in prevention if we can begin to make these topics approachable in common language. I never used the word rape until it happened to me. it's just something that wasn't even, on my radar. And, now that I've grown and met so many victims, and especially victims of child sexual abuse, I feel like it is my mission and my duty to do more to educate everyone and to help people like I was that never really talked about it, never really wanted to talk about it, understand that this is an epidemic that is in our society. It is international. It is everywhere. It is in every neighborhood. Perpetrators are everywhere. They're not the creepy guy in the alley. They're in every profession. They are coaches. They are priests. They are teachers. They are brothers. They are, it just permeates everywhere. And so we all can play a role. If we understand more, we can be more vigilant. We can look out for each other. We can become an active bystander if we see something. There's so many things that we could do.
I love what you named your organization, Jane Doe No More. And that was because when a victim goes through a rape or sexual assault, typically they are shielded and their name isn't used. And so even though people, I think in your community, knew it was you, it wasn't publicized that you were behind this, and you wanted to step out and say, this is me, here I am, I went through this, I will survive and be better. What was that moment like when you kind of took that shield away to say, I'm Donna, I am Jane Doe No More?
It was empowering, but also frightening at the same time. So I came forward for the first time on a national stage. Dateline did the first show as I launched Jane Doe No More. And prior to the show airing, just a couple days prior, I was invited to be on live on the Today Show with Meredith Vieira. So here I am coming out for the first time live, and it was really, really frightening. But I immediately felt like it was what I was meant to do. And so the show was very well received. It was very difficult for my husband because he was interviewed as well. But I think it's so important, Claudia. Like you said, Jane Doe is a nameless, faceless person. And by claiming, when you think about Jane Doe, it's hard to become, to have a relationship or connection with that person. And it's easy for them to disappear. And it's easy for victims with the Jane Doe, banner to feel shame and blame. And by me saying no more, I'm saying we're not the ones that should take on the shame and the blame and the guilt that often society even heaps on us. And, just as women, I think in general, and of course, there's a lot of male victims as well, but we're always thinking about, what could I have done differently? Is there something, what could I, so the self-blame is a natural thing that you're going to process. That's why we all need to understand that the perpetrator is responsible for this, not the victim. This is not something that they intended. And so by putting my name to it, it's like freeing. It's like, no, I am a person. I am Jane Doe No More. I have goals and dreams, and I deserve to have a path forward and to have those in power that are meant to protect and serve do that correctly and not cause harm.
So I love what you just said, particularly about feeling that shame and feeling like we as victims are the ones that can't speak up. I experienced the same thing, and that's something that you and I connected on that I don't really share, but I'm going to share it now, is that when I was a police officer in Colorado, I went through a kidnapping and assault by the chief. And it was then covered up by the town because they didn't want that dirty laundry aired out. And this was 5 years ago. And I'm just now able, even in private conversations, to talk about it because I felt that shame. What did I do wrong? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I see that? Oh, I don't want to tell anybody because it's going to make them uncomfortable. And one day I realized, why am I feeling that way? I'm not the one that did anything wrong. What more can we do to help other survivors understand that it's okay to speak up and to tell your story?
Absolutely. So that's what Jane Doe No More is all about, to just kind of let others know that it is not their fault and that they are not alone. And what I find, Claudia, and first of all, thank you for sharing that. And you know, it's just so unfortunate that people in power abuse it like this, and but we see it all the time. And so that's why it's so powerful when a victim can say, he did this to me, I am not at fault, and we need to make things better for others. And so that's why Jane Doe No More has come forward and provided other survivors with a platform. So we have a Survivor Speak program where we actually work with professional coaches who help us to articulate our story. So we've been doing this for years. There's over 50 plus that are still very active speakers, and we go on to educate others. So we will not only share our story, but then we go on to talk about in the schools in age appropriate language about healthy relationships and the importance of setting boundaries. And we talk about the culture that we live in and recognizing when, you know, when something is out of line and calling it out when you see someone acting inappropriately or telling an inappropriate joke or making fun. And, you know, there's little things that we could all do if we're more vigilant about this. And we go on to talk about consent, what consent is and what it isn't. And to, you know, absolutely notice the nonverbal cues as well, and to be respectful and to ask for permission every step of the way. We, you know, talk about, we mentioned, you know, becoming an active bystander. And, you know, I think that it's so important not only to start young, but then to educate others. So many of our child sexual abuse victims came from dysfunctional families. And unfortunately, the parents were actually complicating the trauma. And so we need everyone to understand more about this. And we need to be unafraid to call out these perpetrators, these acts of violence when we see them. And it's not just, you know, the law enforcement profession, it's the legal profession. It's so many things, and the ripple effect that we see as well, the secondary survivors. I mean, my husband is a secondary survivor. This was a friend of his. He's been traumatized by the entire thing. And so we need more services. So, you know, that's why we at Jane Doe No More, we're 15 years old now. We have a website, janedoenomore.org, which has our programs. We also have a closed private Facebook group for victims of sexual crimes, any victim or survivor. And I use the words the way I use it, and it's everyone's choice. I'm all about giving everyone a choice, but I considered myself a victim and I had to grow to become a survivor. So whichever, you know, name or however you want to be described, you are invited to our Jane Doe No More closed Facebook group. It's just JDNM Survivors, the acronym in Survivors. And there's even a secondary survivors closed group just for secondary survivors, because we know that it's difficult for them when their loved one is hurting and to know what to do or to say. And it's just a safe place where you can get inspiration, or you can just say, I'm having a bad day. Is there anything that you would recommend? And because we all go through it, and just to feel you're in a safe place where you can actually, you know, confide in people that have been in your shoes. And everyone's experience is different, but yet there's a common bond that's very, very strong.
Another really impressive program that you have done through Jane Doe No More is the Duty Trumps Doubt. And that is a video. And then I think you also do, you know, a full teaching program on it. And that is for law enforcement officers to learn how to treat a victim or survivor like you said earlier, with body language, tone of voice, the types of questions, what kind of changes have you seen that make in law enforcement, and how amazing does it feel to you to know that you're a part of that change?
It feels great. I do feel like we have a lot more to do, but we created this Judy Trumps Out video back in 2010, working with professional filmmakers and also university students. So it helped them to be educated as well. So it was a wonderful collaboration. And I was fortunate enough to be able to premiere the video at the International Association Chiefs of Police in Orlando back in 2010. I went down with 3 chiefs of police, and we together presented it. And I do think it is making a difference. But I think it has to be top of mind in every instance. And I think that all too often, departments are short-staffed, and then maybe they're going to send out a person that isn't properly trained. I know from experience from survivors that are part of our group that it still does. The revictimization still happens today. So, there is a lot of work to be done, but it's all about helping them to understand, officers to understand, or first responders of any kind, that they must put their preconceived notions aside and begin by believing. And once they realize that by doing that, it's going to benefit them, because the victim, the survivor, is going to be more forthcoming. They're going to develop a relationship. There's going to be a trust there. But conversely, if they come at them more like a suspect, that victim is going to shut down, or may not remember, or make it even worse, because they're going to be fragmented, and they're not, and the officer or first responder is not going to be able, the case is not going to progress, and they're not ultimately going to be able to find the perpetrator, which should be the ultimate goal, and that's one of the goals. In my case, it was, but to hold that person accountable. So there's just so many reasons why first responders should do the right thing. And that's why, I love the phrase Judy Trumps Out. It's something that, and I do believe that most first responders do want to do the right thing. This is a complex crime, and it's just so misunderstood, and it's layered. And then, my case, you would think would be cut and dry, but it wasn't. But then you complicate it with, an acquaintance rate. Most victims know their assailant, and you complicate that with maybe, a party where there's alcohol involved, and all of that. And it's difficult. It's difficult, but we must always remember to believe until we know otherwise. Until there's absolutely no otherwise, and there's facts, not a rumor that I have no idea if this is true or not, and come at the victim. In my case,
yes, that rock solid evidence in
yeah.
the form of gossip. What is next for Jane Doe No More? What goals do you have? What do you want to achieve next in the organization?
So we just want to keep moving forward in our mission to empower survivors and aid in prevention. So, what sets us apart is that we're completely survivor-led. We're a lean grassroots charity, 501c3, but we're not geographically bound. So we do travel, and we hope to travel more and be in more states. And with our programs, we do offer them virtually as well. Our Safe Student Initiative, our community outreach. I think, like I was saying, everyone needs to understand more about these crimes. So we do events where people gather, whether it's at a library or a civic, or a Rotary Club. Everyone needs to understand more about this, and we make it approachable. And there's a connection that's made when, I think, a person from our survivor team shares their story. You almost see in the audience like a light bulb go off, that, wow, this could happen to her or him. This could happen to me or someone I love. I really should pay attention. I really do need to understand this more. And we want to give people, tips and techniques that they can use to keep safe. We have our own program for self-defense called Escape Alive Survival Skills. We partner with some incredible trainers from East Coast Training Systems. to put on this 4-hour training. That we have now trained over 5,500 women and girls ages 12 and older. And you talked about law enforcement. So we really want to have a well-rounded approach so that everyone can truly understand more about these crimes, so they can aid in prevention and help others as well, and to create a safer, healthier world for people like my 2 little grandbaby girls who are going to be growing up.
What advice would you give to a victim or survivor who has been assaulted, has not yet reported, and is sitting there going, gosh, I don't know what to do, I'm scared? What advice would you give to them?
I would tell them, first of all, that I believe you and it is not your fault. I would get them to a safe place. I would strongly recommend that they go to the hospital and explain to them that everything is overwhelming right now. However, you can go to the hospital. You can have a sex crimes kit conducted to gain evidence, to get evidence, and you do not have to decide whether you want to report it or not to police at this time. You are able to have the kit done prior and then decide, because everything is coming at them and it's just so overwhelming. And I would ask them, what can I do for you right now? What would be helpful? And, I think the most important thing is to believe them.
I agree. And thank you so much for pointing out that a victim can go to the hospital and have that evidence collected without yet making a police report. So thank you so much, because a lot of people don't realize that, and they think, well, if I go to the hospital, then they're going to call the police, and I'm not ready for that. So I'm so glad that you pointed that out as well.
That's a big thing. A lot of people don't realize that. And yet, think about if I didn't go to the hospital that night. If I didn't have DNA evidence, forget it. That perpetrator would have never been caught, and he would be out there to this day attacking people.
What jail sentence did he get?
So that's another complicated mess, because again, he wasn't arrested for the crime he committed in my case. He got the maximum of 12 years for attempted kidnapping of the 17-year-old in New York, Lindsay Ferguson, because he was caught, red-handed and with all the evidence in the van, everything. Unfortunately, his 12 years was served concurrently with the sentences he received in Connecticut. He got 15 years in my case for kidnapping, 5 years for unlawful restraint with the coworker when he attacked the coworker, and 2 years for stalking. But all that was concurrent with the New York case. So it was 15 years together, all together, served together. What I did not know until 2017 was that he qualified for something in Connecticut called statutory good time, which took 1,472 days off his sentence, a little over 4 years. So when at time of sentencing back, when I was told he would do the 15 years, he may do the 12 years in New York and come and serve the remaining 3 in Connecticut. Never happened, because he ultimately finished his Connecticut sentence because of this statutory good time prior to completing his New York sentence. So he finished his New York sentence in 2017, October of 2017, and he is still being held there under something called civil management law, which I'm very grateful for, and which I believe is in about 19 states now. It is not in Connecticut. So actually, as it turned out, again, I'm very grateful that he is in New York, and at this moment he's confined.
Donna, what is next for you? Do you feel like what next passion do you want to achieve or attack?
I want to be able to speak and reach more people. So I'm hoping to be able to speak on a larger stage, and that that will feed in people into the programs for Doe No More, that they can then share with their network and their community. There's many ways to get involved, and I think the most important thing that people just need to know that they can do something about this. It's a terrible feeling when you hear all these horrible things and you think, there's nothing, I feel helpless. I don't know what I can do. You can do something. You can educate yourself and you can help others.
We have talked about a lot and some really heavy stuff. So we're going to take a quick turn here before I let you go. We're going to talk about tattoos. I want to point out first that it is late July and I am in a sweater. So long sleeves, but I do have tattoos. My tattoos tell a story of things that I've been through and things that I have overcome. Now, I know that you don't have any tattoos, but I would love to hear, if you were going to get one, what would you get and why?
Okay. I believe that, what in my case, I had to persevere, and I was able to do that because of my faith, my family, and my nature. I mean, I just put one foot in front of the other. So I think I would have a tattoo that says believe. Believe in yourself, believe in God, believe that there is a better future. Just believe that you can keep going and do good things.
I love it. Where would we put it?
I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I've never honestly really entertained the thought of a tattoo, so I don't know where I would put it.
That's okay. I love your tattoo, though. I think it would be amazing. Donna, where can people find you? So if they want information on Doe No More, the Facebook groups, if they just want to hang out with you because you're super cool, where can people find you?
Yes, please go to janedoenomore.org. You can sign up for our e-newsletter. We only do a couple a month. We're not going to drive you crazy. And you'll find our social media links as well. We're on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. We even have a little YouTube channel. We hope to do more with social media. But our website, we have a blog. Survivors can write a guest blog if they like, that are not affiliated with Doe No More. You will learn more about all of our programs and events that are coming up as well.
Excellent. Donna, thank you so much. You have been truly amazing. I am grateful for everything that you are doing for victims and survivors, and I appreciate you more than you know. I know you're going to reach so many people.
Thank you, Claudia. And I just want to say right back at you for doing this Strong Enough podcast, for being brave enough to share what you are sharing and bringing people on that give inspiration to others. I just am very pleased to be here today with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed my conversation with Donna as much as I did. I truly appreciate all that she shared with us about what she went through and how she was so inspired to make changes to empower survivors going forward. So remember, until next week, you are strong enough and you are worth it. Thank you for listening to the Strong Enough podcast. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform by searching Strong Enough. And on YouTube, we're on the Spear Talk channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Strong Enough Pod. If you have suggestions for an episode or a future guest, please reach out at strongenoughpod@gmail.com. Remember, you are worth it.